Do you have slides or what today?
Tonight, we are thrilled to have Deborah Prentice, who's a professor of psychology here at the university and currently the chair of the psychology department. She did her undergraduate work at Stanford and her PhD at Yale University, which we won't hold against her, because since 1989, she's been here teaching at Princeton, where she teaches courses on social psychology, the psychology of moral behavior, and the psychology of gender. Professor Prentice has done quite a lot of research on gender in particular, and on the ways in which social beliefs and conventions regarding gender actually often sustain gender differences and divisions. So I hope you join me in welcoming Professor Deborah Prentice.
Thank you. If anything is too loud, too quiet, too obscure, let me know. Just raise your hands. Don't mind being interrupted. I'm going to talk tonight about gender stereotypes, so very far up there. Gender stereotypes and the consequences of violating them. As Deborah said, I've done quite a bit of research on this topic myself, so I am going to actually talk about some of the work that I've done. Any study up here that you don't see attributed to somebody else is one from my own lab that my students and I have done. But I'm also going to talk about other people's work as well. Because in fact there's a lot of interesting work being done out there on gender stereotypes. Let me begin by defining gender stereotypes. Gender stereotypes are beliefs about the qualities that women and men do have, that's the descriptive component of gender stereotypes, and should have, that's the prescriptive component of gender stereotypes, by virtue of their gender. One of the unique things about gender stereotypes, or largely unique things about gender stereotypes, is that they have this descriptive and prescriptive nature, right? If you think about it, most stereotypes that we hold of social groups describe what they are supposedly like, but not what they should be like, right? Whereas gender stereotypes are stereotypes of what men and women are like, take on a prescriptive quality. They suggest that in fact not only are men and women like that, they should be like that as well. That's one of the properties of gender stereotypes that I'm going to explore tonight. So gender stereotypes sound like a sort of an old-fashioned concept. One would have thought that by now, in fact, we wouldn't have gender stereotypes anymore with the changes that have happened in society as a result of the women's movement and the real progress that has been made toward equality of the sexes, at least in some domains. But gender stereotypes persist, and one of the most striking features of gender stereotypes is just how little they've changed over time. I did a study about 2 years ago on this campus on the contents of prescriptive gender stereotypes, that is, stereotypes about what men and women should be like. Okay? I asked a couple hundred Princeton undergraduates how desirable it is in American society for a woman, a man, and a person to have each of the following traits. And then there were long lists of traits that students used to rate the average, a woman, a man, and a person in society. Note that they were serving as kind of social, cultural informants here. I wasn't asking them what they thought men and women should be like. I was asking them how desirable it was in American society for women and men to be this way. And I used their ratings to categorize traits into 4 categories. This is going to be a bit abstract, but I'll make it concrete with an example just shortly. Okay? So I divided traits into 4 categories. There were gender had some traits that fell into each category. Okay, and this will give you a sense of the way that people think about, in this case, men. Okay, so men are very much supposed to be high in self-esteem, athletic, to have leadership ability, to be self-reliant, and to be ambitious. These are qualities that men are supposed to have a lot of by virtue of being men. Then, horizontally across from there, the gender-relaxed prescriptions for men are being friendly, helpful, warm and kind, enthusiastic, cheerful, and all of those other sort of positive social qualities that men are, I mean, they're good things to have, but men just don't have to have quite as much of them. They don't have to have quite as much of them as a woman or a person, because after all, they are men, right? Then in the bottom left corner, gender-intensified proscriptions. These are the things that men are supposed to avoid like the plague, okay? And that is being yielding, melodramatic, naive, gullible, weak in any way, okay? These are big no-nos for men, okay, by virtue of being men. But the negative qualities that it's okay for men to have are being controlling, stubborn, promiscuous, self-righteous, and arrogant, okay? This is the way we think about men, right? This is the sort of do's and don'ts of being a man. I did the same thing for women, and you get the same kind of pattern, okay? So women, it's very important that women be warm and kind, interested in children. This actually comes out on all stereotypes, prescriptive stereotypes for women. You are supposed to be interested in children, which is so interesting. But sensitive, friendly, and cheerful. Clean is usually on that list as well. The gender-relaxed prescriptions, the good things that women don't have to be so much of, are intelligent, mature, high self-esteem, having a common sense, and sense of humor. It's okay to be a little humorless if you're a woman. In terms of the things that women are supposed to avoid, you know, it's all the things that are sort of okay for men, right? Being stubborn, controlling, cynical, promiscuous, and arrogant. Whereas women, it's okay to be a little naive, superstitious, weak, melodramatic, and gullible. So this is the way we think about men and women. What was very striking to us about these results is, you know, it looks like no progress has been made at all. These are very much the traditional prescriptions and proscriptions, do's and don'ts of gender that have been around for a very long time. I mean, the methodology and the traits we used were ones that were used in the early 70s, and the results looked actually pretty much the same. Okay? Now, that's not true if you ask people what men and women are actually like. Okay? We also asked people to indicate what traits were typical, how typical each trait was of a man, of a woman, and of, just of a man and a woman. We didn't actually use a person in society. And interestingly, what we found, so these are the descriptive stereotypes, okay? Interestingly, what we found was that the descriptive stereotype of women doesn't map very well onto what they're supposed to be, okay? And in particular, there's one category, of the 4 categories that I showed you, there's one category where the mapping is very poor, okay? And that's the top right, the gender-relaxed prescriptions, okay? So if you ask people what's typical of men and women, you don't get differences on the traits that I've marked in yellow, okay? Women are not perceived to be less intelligent. They're not perceived to be less mature. They're not perceived to have less common sense. In fact, they're perceived to have more common sense. What is typical for them, in a sense, they overachieve these stereotypes, right? The areas in which the prescriptions for women are relaxed, they nonetheless excel in. And that's the one cell where what is prescriptive, what is desirable, and what is typical don't map onto each other. Okay. This is largely as a result of the changes in the roles and of the place of women in society. With women entering the workforce, it's no longer actually typical for women to be less capable in traditionally masculine terms. What's interesting is that it's still less desirable for them, but it's no longer seen as less typical. The other additional finding that I should mention at the outset is that men, and especially women, do not endorse these prescriptions as reflecting their personal beliefs. Okay? So if you ask the students, what do you think a man and a woman should be like? What world do you want to be living in? They describe this world at all. Now that becomes interesting because of the power these prescriptions have, even though people don't personally endorse them. Okay? And in case you think that these, my Princeton subjects were just had an outdated, old-fashioned view of what American society was like, perhaps based on the norms of their parents' generation. I also asked students in a separate study, I looked at the gender stereotypes of Princeton. Okay? I asked them, how desirable is it at Princeton University for a female undergraduate, a male undergraduate, and a person to have each of the following traits? And again, gave them a list, a slightly different list, tailored for a college-age population. To look at whether, in fact, there were the same kinds of prescriptive gender stereotypes operating among, the young and, in fact, quite liberated in most senses Princeton undergraduates of today. The results are actually very interesting. So this is the prescriptive stereotype of men at Princeton. Okay? What you'll notice is the holes, and I'll explain the holes in a second. So there are actually no gender-intensified prescriptions at Princeton for men. What does it mean that there are no gender? So there's nothing that men at Princeton are supposed to have more than a person at Princeton. Okay? Why is that? It's actually because a man is a person at Princeton. Okay? The ratings for what is good for a person and the ratings of what is good for a man overlap perfectly, actually, almost perfectly, when it comes to the university setting. Okay? What's interesting about that is that it reflects the extent to which the typical student, 20 plus years after coeducation, the typical student at Princeton is still very male, very much so. Okay, so the typical student, a person at Princeton, it's very important for a person at Princeton to be athletic, ambitious, high in self-esteem, and so on. Just like it's important for a man to be those things. Okay, and the same with the gender-relaxed proscriptions and negative qualities that it's okay for a man to have. Those are the exact same negative qualities that it's okay for a person at Princeton to have. Okay, with the exception of domineering, this only kind of masculine quality that actually is marked, if you will, for males as compared to just the typical student at Princeton. But what you can see the influence of the feminine, if you will, in the gender-relaxed prescriptions and gender-intensified proscriptions. That is, the feminine qualities that men don't have to have as much of, and that they should avoid like the plague, right? So there you get sort of typical list of positive feminine qualities: energetic, enthusiastic, cheerful, womankind, and creative. They're less important for men than for people or women. And the negative feminine qualities being melodramatic, shy, naive, gullible, and insecure, that are especially important for men to avoid. Okay? So what this illustrates, what these sort of, this very kind of sketchy masculine stereotype at Princeton illustrates, is really the overlap of what's good for a man and what's good for a person at this university. It's not the same for women. For women, you get a picture that looks very much like the societal stereotype. Okay, so Princeton women, female undergraduates are supposed to be friendly, cheerful, pay attention to appearances. As I said, clean shows up a lot. To be warm and kind and approachable. Okay, they don't have to be as intelligent, active, competent, confident, or articulate. Now that's extraordinary. I mean, they're university women. These are exactly the qualities that are most important for success at the university. Whereas these qualities are highly prized for male undergraduates and for people at Princeton, women, it's still desirable, it's still good, but it's slightly less desirable. Again, I've highlighted in yellow the traits where women are perceived to actually be as good as men or better on average. So it's not that women aren't seen as having these qualities. It's just not as important that they have them. Okay. And then again, in terms of the gender-intensified proscriptions, you're not supposed to be intimidating, cynical, domineering, stubborn, or self-righteous, and it's okay to be shy, naive, gullible, insecure, and weak. Okay. It's an interesting. We're at an interesting moment, I think, at this university in terms of the role of women. I mean, there's a sense in which, in every sense, enormous amounts have been achieved, obviously. Women are here. They're some of our best students, the Pine Prize winners, which is the top academic, top actually all-around honor given each year, goes as often to women impact, the same kind of impact on people's lives as they once did? Well, the answer to that is actually a resounding yes, and I'm going to talk about two ways in which they matter, actually quite a lot. First of all, they matter very much in the way that they shape how individuals think about themselves and their capabilities. Okay? People measure themselves against stereotypes, especially these prescriptive stereotypes, even if they don't endorse them, even if they wish society didn't feel that way, right? And this is true for men and women. This is not just a fact for women. In fact, men live under the yoke of gender stereotypes just as much as women do, okay? And even if they don't personally endorse them, they do measure themselves against them, and they do manage these stereotypes very much in their everyday lives. I wanted to talk about an interesting phenomenon that shows, I think, very well the impact that gender stereotypes have on individuals, and that's a phenomenon that's known as stereotype threat. Okay? So let me explain to you a little bit about what stereotype threat is, and then I'm going to show you the results of an empirical study done by some colleagues at Brown University that illustrate exactly how it works. Okay? Stereotype threat is a phenomenon that was actually first identified by a social psychologist at Stanford University named Claude Steele. Some of you may be familiar with his work on the impact of stereotype threat on especially African American students. And what stereotype threat is the threat that one feels when one is at risk of confirming a negative stereotype of one's group. Okay? So it's when one steps into a stereotype domain, right, and one's performance is possibly going to confirm a negative societal stereotype, a negative stereotype that people out there have about the group, right? So this would be true, for example, for African American students in academic domains, right? Where in that domain, they may, if they perform poorly, that poor performance will serve to validate the societal stereotype that African Americans have less ability academically than do white students. Okay? In the case of gender, it operates actually quite strongly for women in quantitative fields. Okay? So women in math, science, and engineering are vulnerable to having their performance confirm the negative stereotype of women as less able in math. Okay? And what this threat does, this threat actually leads students to perform worse in the stereotyped domain. How does it work? There's actually been a lot of studies on how exactly it works. But it's kind of a burden, right? It's a source of threat, of anxiety, of performance anxiety. And threat and anxiety can very much interfere with performance, such that when you're in a stereotype domain, the anxiety that you experience over the possibility that you'll perform poorly can actually interfere with your ability to perform well. Okay? Let me tell you about a study that illustrates this really well, and that actually has some, I think, interesting applied implications as well. So this is a study actually done, as I mentioned, by a couple colleagues at Brown. And what they did was they brought male and female students into the lab, and they had them take a math test. And what they varied in this study was who was taking the math test with them. Okay? So they were always in a group of 3 people in a room, and either the other 2 people were of their same gender or were of the other gender. Okay? So for a female student, she either took the test in a room with 2 women or with 2 men. For male students, they either took the test in a room with 2 men or 2 women. That's it. Very simple. Okay? The question was, how well did they do on the test? Well, what would stereotype threat suggest? These investigators expected to find was that when you were in a room with 2 members of the other gender, that is, when you were a minority, you were the token member of your gender in the room, your gender was suddenly going to be very salient to you. Okay? A woman in a room with 2 men is going to think of herself in terms of her female gender. A man in the room with 2 women single-sex education, right? And this is a topic that actually comes up very frequently in discussions of women in math. What this suggests is that, in fact, by eliminating the possibility of stereotype threat, it can actually help women quite a lot. And just to show that this wasn't some peculiarity of this particular, just to show that this difference was particular to performance on a math test, that is performance in a stereotype domain, they ran a second study in which they had just women come in and again take a test, this time either a verbal or a math test in a room with either two women or two men. And what they showed was that, in fact, it was only performance on the math test that suffered from being a lone woman. On the verbal test, it didn't matter whether there were men in the room or women in the room, they performed just the same. Okay? Because, in fact, thinking of themselves as a woman on a verbal test, there's no stereotype of women's performance on verbal tests. And so they wouldn't feel any extra burden, they wouldn't experience any threat or anxiety associated with doing poorly. Okay? So this phenomenon, and there are many, many studies like this, I just happen to like these because of the way that they instantiated the way they reminded people of their gender is so subtle and it's so common to the experience of students, for example, in math and engineering classes at this university and at all universities. There are relatively few women in those classes, and women can very often find themselves the only woman, right? And feeling very, very female about that, right? This shows that can actually have significant impact on their academic performance. So you might ask, what do women do, right? There are women who are actually quite successful in quantitative fields, in scientific fields. How do they manage the feminine stereotype? How do they manage to be both women and, excellent mathematicians at the same time? Well, one of my colleagues here, actually, Emily Cronin, has done some nice studies on how women manage the feminine stereotype, how they preserve some adherence to societal, demands that women be feminine, and yet free themselves a bit from to do well, if you will, in non-stereotyped and non-traditional domains. The concept that she's used in her research is what's called identity bifurcation. Okay, what's identity bifurcation? Identity bifurcation is a process through which people women reject aspects of the feminine stereotype that are associated with poor math performance, and embrace aspects of the feminine stereotype that are unrelated to poor math performance. Okay? So in other words, rather than accepting the stereotype as a whole conglomeration that either applies to them or not, they'll be selective. They'll say, okay, I'm not these things that would make me bad at math, but I am these things still that make me a woman, a good member of my gender, and an observer of the norms of my society. And let me just illustrate this process to give it, to concretize it a bit, with a study that Emily and her colleagues, again Claude Steele and Lee Ross, did at Stanford University. So this is with women, college undergraduates, very much like Princeton undergraduates, who were brought into the laboratory, and they were classified beforehand as either very quantitatively oriented. These were the female students who had taken more than 10 quantitative courses at Stanford. Okay, it's a lot of quantitative courses. And the non-quantitatively oriented students, which were those students who had taken fewer than 10 quantitatively oriented courses. The idea here is that any woman who survived 10 quantitatively oriented courses has found some way of dealing with this, right? She's found some way of managing the stereotype of women as being less good at math. Let's see how she does it. And they gave them a set of attributes and asked them to endorse these attributes, feminine attributes, and asked them to endorse each of these attributes in terms of how self-descriptive it is. How descriptive is this of you? And these attributes were of two types. Okay, there were a bunch that were relevant to the stereotype of women as bad at math, and these were things like flirtatious, emotional, gossipy behaviors like wearing makeup, plans like having children, and especially leaving work to have children. Okay, these are the qualities. These are the feminine qualities that are associated with women, with the negative stereotype about women who have. Okay? It's the gossipy, flirtatious, makeup wearing women who are bad now. And then there are a bunch of feminine qualities that were not stereotype relevant. Okay, things like being sensitive, nurturing, empathetic, fashionable. It's okay to be all of those things, and you're still allowed to be good at that. And what they thought was that the women who had succeeded, who were invested in quantitative fields and who had managed to conquer 10 quantitative courses, would distance from the stereotype relevant characteristics. Okay, and they would embrace the stereotype non-relevant characteristics. Okay, compared to non-quantitatively oriented women who would in fact endorse both of these equally. Okay? And in fact, that's just what they found. You can see that the women, so the green and yellow bars are the women who took few quantitative courses, and they tended to endorse the low relevance qualities slightly more than the high relevance qualities, but only slightly. That difference was not statistically significant. It was not a reliable difference. Whereas women who'd taken many quantitative courses were not makeup wearers, not gossipy, and not flirtatious, but they were just as sensitive and empathetic and nurturing and fashionable as the other women were. Okay? So this is a way of managing feminine stereotype, basically. And in fact, she has some additional studies, in which she actually asks women for accounts of their behaviors. And what I can tell you is that women in engineering classes would no more wear lipstick than fly. I mean, there's some funny connection between wearing lipstick just does not predispose you to a quantitative career. But women can give that up. I mean, they can put that aside, right, and still embrace aspects of being feminine, being sort of stereotypically feminine, that are more consistent with the other things they want to be, like men. Okay. So I hope I persuaded you with these two phenomena that stereotypes do shape how individuals think about themselves and their capabilities. I should say that in all of these studies, and basically all the studies I'll talk about, it's not that the women endorse the stereotypes as true for women or as things that should be true for women, but they know that they're out there, okay? That people in general believe them, that society believes them, and that they're therefore a force to be reckoned with. Okay, so the second reason I want to talk about, the second reason that gender stereotypes matter that I want to talk about for the rest of the lecture today is that gender stereotypes shape how people treat each other. Okay? Again, even if people don't endorse the stereotypes, that doesn't mean they don't act on the stereotypes. What's very interesting to see is the extent to which people will be cultural enforcers while being disavowers at the same time of these kinds of, especially of the prescriptive gender stereotypes. There's been quite a bit of literature on how people treat gender conformists and deviants. So let me just characterize that for you first, and then I'll tell you about some research that I've done on the topic. So there have been a lot of studies of how people treat children, right? How do people treat tomboys and sissies? I probably should put it that way because the value connotations are there in the words we use to describe them, right? We don't actually have a positive word to describe little boys with feminine qualities. Culturally they're sissies. And that reflects the fact that, in fact, among children, feminine boys are punished by everybody, by other boys and by adults. Treatment of masculine girls is much more varied. Okay, so the treatment that tomboys, if you will, get is much more varied. Little girls are allowed much more leeway in the expression of sort of boyish, masculine, if you will, characteristics than our little boys. Okay, so a little girl who's into trucks and wears pants and all the rest, won't be seen discrepancy here, right? Among children, it's the feminine boys who are in trouble. Among adults, it's the masculine women who are in trouble. Now that could be just an emphasis of where the research has been done. It could be that feminine men get ostracized even more than masculine women do. But I was curious about this. And so I've actually conducted now a number of studies on how gender conformists, people who abide by gender stereotypes, and gender deviants are treated, again, in the context of Princeton University. Okay? Let me tell you about these studies in a little bit of detail. What we've done in these studies is we've created gender conformists and gender deviants by asking students by having a large sample of men and women read very masculine, neutral, and feminine statements into a tape recorder and then playing those for people and asking them to evaluate the speaker. Okay? To give you an idea of what our stimuli are like in these experiments, let me play a few for you. This shouldn't be too loud this time. So this is a man making a masculine statement. This is a masculine guy.
My physics teacher is always pushing me to set the example for my peers. I'm the best in the class by far, and the other kids tend to follow my lead.
Okay, you know, a guy like thing to say, a guy saying it. Here's a woman
My
saying it.
physics teacher is always pushing me to set the example for my peers. I'm the best in the class by far, and the other kids tend to follow my lead.
Okay? She's somehow a very different person than he is, even though she's saying the exact same thing. I'll give you examples of more women making masculine statements.
I did really well in my SATs, so well that I know I'll get in anywhere I want. I can't wait to tell my friends. I know that none of them could have done as well.
Okay? Not the kind of thing you hear women saying every day.
I chose to run for class president, even though my sister was also planning to run. My sister was pretty upset, but I think we both knew that I'd be the better president.
Okay, so we have this whole set of and we tested these statements ahead of time to make sure that they were perceived as masculine statements when spoken by either a man or a woman. Okay, and so some people hear these statements from the mouth of a man, some hear these statements from the mouth of a woman. Then we've got our feminine statements. So here's a feminine female.
I just don't feel comfortable delegating tasks or giving orders. For me, feeling like I'm leading the pack means feeling alone and under scrutiny. And I'm always afraid I'll embarrass myself somehow.
Okay, that's sort of the gullible or slightly has those qualities that women are allowed to have. Now, men.
I just don't feel comfortable delegating tasks or giving orders. For me, feeling like I'm leading the pack means feeling alone and under scrutiny. And I'm always afraid I'll embarrass myself somehow.
One thing about these men making feminine statements is when you listen to them, you realize how uncommon this is in your experience, right? When you hear the women making masculine statements, I mean, they sound a little extreme, but they're within the realm of possibility, whereas men just don't say things like this.
Most of my friends listen to NSYNC and the Backstreet Boys. I like those bands too, don't get me wrong, but I'd really rather listen to the Indigo Girls or Sarah McLachlan.
I don't know how up you are on popular music, but that is an outlandish thing for a guy to say.
I'm a total romantic. My favorite daydream is one where I meet my perfect match while I'm on my junior year abroad, while strolling along the Champs-Élysées, or sunbathing on a Greek island.
You're tittering. That tends to be what people do in response to feminine men, as you'll see. Okay, so we were interested. What this methodology gives us actually, and I play you the statements to give you a sense of what we're asking people in our studies to do. What it gives you is it gives you in a very brief moment a very evocative sense of a person, and there's something about the voice, right, combined with the statement, that you actually do get a sense of somebody that you could evaluate. We ask our participants. We've done a number of studies in which we've asked participants to tell us what they think of these people, okay? And we typically ask how much do you like this person and how much do you respect this person after each statement. And the other thing we've been doing in order to get at a little bit better at the complexity of people's feelings toward these people, and also the kind of involuntary nature of people's feelings about gender conformists and deviants, is we've been using a technique placing electrodes over top of particular muscle areas that we contract when we experience a particular emotion. Okay? And what's nice about this method is it provides a sensitive measure of spontaneous affective reactions to targets. Okay? What you feel shows up on your face. And we measure these sort of subtle facial movements with electrodes that enable us to pick up actually very subtle kinds of movements. So this is what this is one of my subjects. This is actually the husband of my main collaborator on this, who was our victim many times over. This is what the setup looks like. Okay, so you actually put electrodes over top of these different muscle areas, and I'll show you the muscle areas in a second. And then have participants listen to the statements and make ratings while you see what they're doing with their faces in the meantime. Okay? The muscle areas we've been most interested in, that's CMG Mona, are these four. Okay? So on the top right is the frontalis pars medialis. This is actually the muscle that you raise when you're surprised or you're perplexed. Okay, this is the one you use. The corrugator supercilii is this one. It's your frown muscle. You relax it when you're smiling. You tense it when you're frowning. Okay, so it's a good measure of sort of positive to negative affect. You can see that Mona's corrugator is very relaxed, very happy. Down at the bottom right, the zygomaticus major is the muscle that pulls your lips up into a smile. Okay? And the orbicularis oculi is this muscle right here. It's called the cheek raiser muscle. But what it does is it crinkles up your eyes. Okay? Now, the only way we can tell if somebody is smiling out of true enjoyment is if both their zygomaticus and their orbicularis are active. Right? It's activity across those two muscles that signals a smile of true enjoyment. Activity in just the zygomaticus can be a false smile. It can be a miserable. I mean, we've got all sorts of smiles in our repertoire. Okay, but when we're smiling out of true enjoyment, we tend to orbicularis as well. Okay. What do we find when we hook people up to this apparatus, have them listen to these statements? Let me first give you the self-reported reactions. That is what they tell us they feel about these people, and then I'll show you what they actually do with their faces. And they're consistent, but in a very interesting way, and in a way that I think reveals a lot about sort of the complexity of social reactions. So let me start with men, because men and women do different things. These are the self-reported reactions of men. Okay, so the categories across the bottom are the type of target it is: feminine, neutral, or masculine targets. The yellow are the male targets, and the blue are the female targets. Okay, so the bar furthest to the left is the feminine male, then the feminine female target. The neutrals are in the middle, and the masculine male, and then female are at the end. Okay, and what is on the y-axis is how much they like and respect the person by their own reports. And what you can see, first of all, is that people like the feminine targets a lot more than the masculine targets. This isn't surprising. They have positive social qualities. But in addition, the men show a tendency to like the conformists just a bit better than the deviants. Okay, and those differences are reliable. Men really like their feminine targets to be female, and they like their masculine targets to be male. And this is very consistent. Okay, men show this pattern of what's called derogating deviance. They tend to reject deviance, whether feminine or masculine. They like people to conform to gender stereotypes. This is interesting because, I mean, from a very young age, men are held to gender stereotypes. They tend to be the enforcers of these stereotypes all the way through life. Okay. Now let me show you what this liking or disliking and respect or disrespect actually looks like on their faces. So I'm going to show you a video. This is a man listening to this is a man listening to a feminine male target.
Most of my friends listen to NSYNC and the Backstreet Boys. I like those bands too, don't get me wrong, but I'd really rather listen to the Indigo Girls or Sarah McLachlan.
reaction, they don't dislike them. I mean, as you saw in the ratings, they rate them fairly positively. But there's a derisive kind of reaction toward them. It's, some sort of superior kind of laughing, smiling reaction to them. Okay, this is what men do in response to masculine women.
I know I'm the smartest person in my class. I'm tied with someone else. The difference between he and I is that he had to work for it. I'm more of a natural.
As you can see, they're very compelled by these people. I mean, they often talk to them. And you have to realize they're alone in a room when they're doing this. They're actually alone. They're listening to this over speakers in a room. They don't know we're videotaping them, which is part of the reason for the low quality of the videotapes. It's a hidden camera. We tell them afterward and ask them to release their tapes, which is why I can show them to you now. Their experiences of being alone, so they're not actually they're not displaying this reaction to anybody in particular. This is much more. This is just their spontaneous what they're feeling about each of these targets. Okay, what's interesting about his reaction is that actually it's a combination of positive and negative affect at the same time. What you can see is he was tensing up his corrugator and grinning widely at the same time. Theories of emotion actually have no explanation for that kind of reaction, but as social beings, we know that reaction very well, right? Captures, I think, the complexity of reactions to deviant targets and to masculine women in particular, right? You can sort of see it written all over his face. Okay, women are a much different story. Here are the self-reported data, the liking and respect ratings for women. And what you can see is that they like the male targets better than the female targets, regardless of what their behavior is like, okay? And B, their most positive reactions are to the feminine men. They really like the feminine men socially. Now remember, these are social reactions. These are sort of, liking, who do you want to be friends with? Women show very positive reactions, and there's really I've not found any negativity in these reactions at all. They have very positive reactions to the feminine men, okay? They also like the masculine targets even less than do the men, and they like the masculine females least of all, okay? So they react positively toward men in general. They react strongly negatively toward masculinity in general, and those two effects combined leave them quite enamored of the feminine men. So let me give you some examples. This is actually a woman reacting to a masculine woman, I think. There we go.
It's true that I can be selfish, but I think people function better when they put their own needs first. I make my personal desires my first priority, whatever the situation calls for it.
So that's pure dislike. I mean, there's sort of nothing bemused or superior about it. What you see with women is they use their foreheads much more. You saw her raise her eyebrows. A lot of them will do this in response to a masculine one. Who does she think she is? And here's the kind of reaction that the feminine men get.
I'm really close to my parents. I'm afraid that I'm really going to miss them when I go away to school. I depend on them a lot for advice and moral support.
Yeah, she's saying, oh. There's no negativity in her reaction at all. Okay, so what we get, it's interesting. What we get with the women are very sharply distinct positive and negative reactions. Positive to the feminine targets, especially the men, and negative to the masculine targets, especially the women. Okay? Whereas what we see with the men is much more of a mix. I mean, what we see with the men is a kind of enjoyment of their dislike of the masculine women, and a kind of a mild liking, but with a strong hint of superiority toward the feminine men. I think this mirrors actually, I like the facial data because I think it captures much better all the things that people are feeling, which you only get a glimpse of with the liking and respect ratings. Okay? reactions much more than we would think. Thank you. Yep.
Is there any mapping done between the scripts you use to characterize masculine versus feminine against the prescriptive and prescriptive characteristics? Because I noticed one thing was a lot of the women were very arrogant, and that was a proscriptive, very intense proscriptive, while the masculine one wasn't necessarily intense proscriptive with the I Link, NSYNC, or Sarah McLachlan.
Right. Yeah. I mean, what we did was we did map. We used our earlier studies to formulate what the statements ought to be. We then pilot tested them, as I mentioned, on a whole lot of people to ensure that the masculine statements were seen as masculine regardless of whether a male or a female read them, and the feminine statements were seen as feminine regardless of whether a male or female read them. What that served to do, actually, we kept the range of our feminine statements, but it tended to narrow down the masculine statements. And the reason why it did that was because of another effect that I showed you, which is that women are commonly seen as manifesting these characteristics. Okay, so there were lots of times when we would instantiate a masculine characteristic, like being high self-esteem or intelligent or mature, and a woman would read it and it would sound perfectly natural and even feminine or neutral to people, right? So in order to because we were interested in how people react to deviance, we had to create statements that would be deviant when read by, we had to create masculine statements that would be deviant when read by a woman, right? And because women, in fact, manifest a huge range of qualities, the number of qualities that were actually perceived to be deviant when read by a woman was much more narrow. So those qualities tend to be the more competitive, arrogant. There are a bunch of traits that are manifested there, but they're all versions of this kind of competitive, arrogant, insensitive kinds of set of qualities that you saw and that are responsible for the large differences in just how much people liked the feminine and masculine targets.
So were the neutral statements then a lot of the prescriptive?
The neutral statements were truly and deeply neutral. They were things like, I like to go jogging with my Walkman, that kind of statement. So, and we included those as a baseline, and I could actually tell you a whole story about the neutrals. Yeah.
Go back to that issue about the value of single-sex education for girls in mathematics and quantitative fields. Do you have any data regarding their success of girls who have gone through middle school or high school and single-sex education, and later on what they did either in college or in adult life?
Yeah, it's actually, there are quite a lot of data on that, because this is something that people have cared very much about. The patterns of data are actually fairly complex. It matters the point at which where you are in your developmental trajectory and in your educational trajectory, and it matters where you've been. If your question specifically is about whether women who've been schooled in single-sex high schools, how they then fare in co-educational environments in college, you get a mix, and it depends on a lot of qualities of the individual. In some cases, that earlier experience actually serves to, they basically dealt with the issues, and so they're then sort of fortified to enter into a co-educational environment and do just fine. In other cases, they need to continue in a single-sex environment in order to continue to do well. The data on women in these quantitative fields is most of them, the majority of women actually don't stick it out. So the majority of women drop out. So there's much more data on failures than there are on successes. But I have noted cases, for example, at Princeton, where women who were in single-sex high schools came to Princeton to pursue math, because we have a top-notch math department, right? And they ended up actually transferring to women's schools because they found the environment one that they could not succeed in here. So, it's a story of a lot of different kinds of patterns, but all of which I think are consistent with the general notion that it is a burden that women either have to be ready for or have to somehow manage in some way.
Yep. In the beginning study that you shared with us about Princeton attitudes of gay men and women about these stereotypes? And if not, what would you hypothesize the results would be?
Well, it's very interesting. There haven't been those studies. There have actually been very few studies focusing on gay participants as perceivers. Gay people are typically the targets in research, right? As opposed to looking at their perceptions. And it would actually, I think, be very interesting to look at. In general, gay men and lesbians, and in fact, all members of stigmatized minority groups tend to have much less conformist beliefs. You know, they're the anti-enforcers of the norms compared to members of the dominant culture, if you will. You know, and it's the explanation for that is a lot about what the world looks like from a stigmatized point of view. And so I think what you would find, judging from the previous literature on stigmatized groups in general, is that gay men and lesbians would probably have less sort of stereotypical views of men and women. And they might even have more egalitarian views of other groups as well, because the experience of stigma seems to generalize in perceptions of groups. Yep.
I have been interested in this topic a long time ago, and I wonder if some of the literature that's evolving in a similar way. But have you heard of Martina Horner?
Sure.
Fear of Success?
Yes.
Do you see great changes along the same, or the Broverman studies?
The Broverman studies were some of the early studies of gender stereotypes, actually.
That's what I take back.
Yeah, well, when I was referring to the fact, because the methodology that I used was from the work that Sandra Mann did in the early 70s, which was of the same vintage. I think the Broverman studies were late 60s. You know, what's very striking is that the findings here are very similar to what they found there. In terms of fear of success, I mean, the way in which our culture has evolved with respect to gender and success by women is actually fascinating. I mean, there have been incredible changes over time. Incredible changes over time, and yet progress has been much more cyclical, I think, than many people expected. I think that in the late 60s and early 70s, when the women's movement was just getting going, there was a sense that we were just going to have, you know, linear progress up. And what's happened is that, you know, there's been 2 steps forward and 1 step back, and in fact, in recent years, there's been real questioning of what the meaning of success would be. So some of you may be familiar, a year ago or maybe a little bit less, there was an article that got a lot of attention on this campus in the New York Times Magazine about women deciding to step off the corporate ladder or the you know, sort of business track to success in order to have more balanced lives and raise a family and just, you know, have something that looked a lot more like the kind of traditional ideal for women. But these were in fact women, and one of the reasons it got a lot of play on this campus was that it focused heavily on Princeton women. Who'd sort of gone out there. I mean, they'd had the improved equality of opportunity, and they'd gone out there and they'd actually sampled that life and decided that it wasn't what they wanted. And I think that raised a lot of questions about what liberation and choice and all of those things actually mean. Do they mean the ability to truly choose one track or the other? At one time, that was not the way the success would have been defined.
I very much enjoyed your lecture and how things have evolved. Can I ask a provocative question?
I don't know.
I mean,
try me.
It's political in that I find that the women that I find now that I would like to see politically active are very unpopular, like Hillary Clinton, because she doesn't act, you know, on stereotypic ways, whereas Mrs. Bush certainly does. So I guess I'm saying, do you think in real life they're still going by the old stereotypes?
I think these data, and there are lots of data to suggest that we like men, they are unpopular and deeply ineffective at what they do. That said, what's interesting is, I mean, that women can be leaders and they can actually be strong leaders, especially in managerial positions. Managerial positions are becoming actually female dominated. Increasingly, women are the managers, the administrators, the people who make things run. And as a consequence, the stereotype of what a manager is becoming feminized. It's now becoming necessary in order to be a good manager that you have these feminine skills. Now, if you're a cynic, you're going to say, yeah, and very soon managers will be making about half of what they make now, right? And that may happen. But there are these sort of, it's interesting to watch the way this shakes out. Hillary Clinton is obviously a very polarizing person because she, in fact, doesn't lead in a particularly feminine way. Or she's a mix. I mean, sometimes she really does, and sometimes she really doesn't. There still are very strong strictures on women to maintain. Women are allowed to be, as I said, they're allowed to be intelligent, competent, and all of these things, just so long as they're still warm and kind and nice and interested in children. There's a balance that you can strike. There's a way that you can succeed, but it's actually it requires being a superwoman of a very extraordinary sort to do it.
Yes. You mentioned managerial leadership in women, and I was wondering what you make of this thing. I read an article, I think in Bust magazine about 2 years ago, about how certain women are being taught to cry and work to make themselves more, I guess, acceptable. Like if they are really like pushy, they go to like a bully boot camp.
Bully Broads, it's called, yeah.
Yeah.
In Marin County. There really is such a place where they send women who are too hard. There's a whole set of stories done, actually. I remember a whole set of stories done a year or two ago, I guess, is when you read it. And it was probably part of this spate of interest in a firm called Bully Broads that actually was like, boot camp for overly masculine women. And it would train them to cry on demand and to show their feminine qualities. It's obviously extremely controversial. I read a write-up of it actually in the Wall Street Journal. It was the business world sort of answer to what to do with these women with, I think as they put it, too much testosterone, right? And I actually recently checked to see if that website still exists, and it does, although it's not called Bully Broads anymore, which I thought was a shame. I think it must have gotten a bad reputation from its name. But and it offers a broader array of training options, but it still will train women out of their masculine ways. I think the business world is always an interesting domain because it's whatever succeeds, right? And obviously that company, that consulting firm, got a lot of press and attention because it was successful. It served some role in that environment. That said, the other thing about the business world is that it changes very rapidly, and so it's difficult to know what's next on the horizon for women in leadership positions.
Thank you.
You're welcome.